very boring and long answer. I'm so sorry.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a perfect introduction. And
I mean, you don't know
sounds
how you're going to edit
wonderful.
that. I didn't stop.
No, it's fine. I can edit
Are you sure?
that.
Recording in progress.
In progress. Hello, and welcome back to Crafted Reality, the podcast where we dive into the world of play, story, and technology, exploring the ways we craft experiences that shape how we see the world. In this episode, we are joined by Lisa Heledd Jones, a storyteller, artist, and producer whose work explores the connections between people, places, and memory. Through her creative practice, she brings often overlooked stories to life across audio, performance, film, and installation. From intimate personal stories to immersive projects, Lisa's work invites audiences to listen, reflect, and engage. We discuss her creative process, the ethics of storytelling, and the power of sound as a narrative tool. If you're enjoying the podcast and want to support the work we do, consider heading over to our Patreon page. The link is in the show notes. So I did journalism in Cardiff University. I definitely thought that I wanted to do something with people, and I just couldn't work out what that thing would be. As part of that course, in fact, I remember the very, very first day of my degree. I went into a lecture hall, and there was a lecture from Daniel Meadows, and he talked about the Photobus project, which is a photography project that he'd done in the 1970s, going around the north of England in this bus where there was a dark room on the top floor, and he would take photographs of people, portraits in car parks and things, and then they would come back the next day and he would have created a print for them, and 30 years later he went back and re-photographed people, if he could find them, in the same place, and then he recorded people to find out what happened in their lives. I watched this lecture and I was like, wow, this is going to be the best degree in the whole world. This is incredible. This is what I want. We did not see that person again. Daniel Meadows did not appear because he was on secondment to the BBC to start a digital storytelling project. But he was running a module in the third year, and it had room for 20 people on it, and the degree had 150 people. And bearing in mind, I barely went to university for the first year. I was having a lot of fun. That makes it sound like I was out drinking. I wasn't even out drinking. I was eating three-course meals in restaurants, because I'd come from a village where I live now and I'd never eaten in a restaurant before. Anyway, I knew that lecture had changed my life. I knew that something in this storytelling thing, which I'd not heard about before, there was going to be something really important. And so I waited. I can't believe I did this. It's so unlike me in some ways. I waited, I stayed overnight outside the Butte building in Cardiff so that I could be the first person to sign up for that module when the modules were opening up. It's unbelievable to me that I did that, because it took such commitment and grit to go and do that. And it's because I was I have to do that module. And this was 2.5 years after that first lecture, and I'd not seen him again in the meantime. And so I did. And the module involved having to go out into Cardiff, meet a stranger, and then tell their story on a one-page website. And I did it about a guy who ran a second-hand shop in Cardiff, and I went to his house and I recorded him, and it was this absolute this is it. This is what I'm built to do, is to record people and to spend time with them and to tell their story. And I loved it. That's the first project, the first sort of thing in my degree that I finished early. I finished that website. I learned how to code. I had never ever felt so committed to something as as to this thing. So I did that, and and then after I graduated, I was like determined to go and work on this BBC project. And I emailed Daniel Meadows like every week. I think I was working in the Students' Union I was working in the Students' Union in the box office. It's very boring, but it was fine. I loved it. But I was emailing him every week and saying, "Can I have work experience? Can I have work experience? Can I have work experience?" And again, showing a level of commitment which is uncanny. And then and then he said, "Come and have a chat." And I went and had a chat with Karen Lewis, who was the producer at the BBC, and they said, "Come and do a month's work experience." I did a month's work experience, and I literally never left until the project came to an end. So 7 years later, I left the BBC. They offered me a job after a few months. So it was freelance and then a job, and it was like, it was a dream. It was a dream job, and those people in that team at the BBC on this digital storytelling project, which was called Capture Wales. It was going around Wales, running workshops, helping people tell stories about their lives. In the end, there was about 1,500 stories in Welsh and English, which are now all housed in the National Library in Aberystwyth. And it was like creating an alternative map of Wales through people's stories, which at the time was a big deal, because there wasn't YouTube. People were not telling their own stories. The BBC did not give people the opportunity to tell their own stories. It was very top-down media. It was a life-changing experience. And the people involved in that, they remain my mentors and friends to this day. And 20 years on, that foundation. And I guess the key to it all was this idea that everyone has a story to tell. Like that was the big thing. And it sounds so cliched now, but at the time, in a world of like dominant mass media, that was massive. That was a massive thing. But the other big element of my life, and I'm sure this is connected, is that my grandmother lived with us for a while, and she had Alzheimer's and had lost all her stories. And I think that's something to do with it. That sort of idea of the everyday person and the extraordinary lives that people lead in their ordinary ways, and that having just been taken away from my nine, Mona, that I think that's why when I could see that there was this project that was about capturing people's everyday interests, passions, stories, I was like, yes, I'm in. That's what I want. That's what I want to do. And I guess that's what has always kept me interested after that. When the BBC project came to an end, I went to the University of Glamorgan and worked at the university for a few years, on secondment in the George Ewart Evans Centre for Storytelling. And I really enjoyed that. That's where I did a lot of health stories, which also was an area that I was really interested in. And then we were made redundant, but it was a weird one because we were in the middle of all these projects. So Storyworks, we spun it out, and that's when I started. I'd never ever aimed to run my own company, but it just became like a thing that happened, and then 12 years Storyworks. I worked with my good friend Ian Peebles to make Storyworks happen for that length of time. But yeah, I guess I'll just do a little bit more context, right? I live in Glyndwrdwy, which is what I'm looking out on now, in North Wales. It's the village, where I grew up. I think it's, again, so important to my life. It's a village of 500 people. It's a real mixed bag of Welsh speaking and English speaking. And it's got the A5 cutting through it, and people either live on one side of the A5 or the other, and there's this kind of as with so many places, there's the divide, is it the road or the river? About 9 years ago, I moved back to North Wales, and again, the amount of times I had the conversation of like, don't you feel like you're going backwards? And it was one of the first times that I think I listened to myself, and I was like, no, this is like, being part of this community is absolutely integral to my integrity, and also being part of telling the story of North Wales as well. Like, this area is really, really important to me. One of the questions that you sent was around sound and like what makes me interested in recording sound, and I think that because I'm pretty sure I started recording, like field recording sounds in the late, it was when I was working a lot on quite intense stories, like people with a lot of illnesses, a lot of cancer stories, and I came across a record that was all about the sounds of London, and I loved it. And it was like the sound of kettles boiling, it was the sound of like, you know, there was the one of the sounds was a wastewater works, like, you know, and all of this sort of stuff. And I was like, oh my God. And I found it so like calming to engage with sounds that weren't sort of filled with emotional narrative, maybe, or like, you know, people's the weight of what people were experiencing, which is perhaps what was happening in the rest of my working life at that time. So for fun, I started recording like sound in like birds initially, and field recording. And I think that the main thing for me was about slowing down and listening intently, because you ruin any recording if you're moving. You literally do have to be still, and then noticing when my mind was wandering away from what I could hear, and it just became a practice initially that was about, you know, was about stillness, even though I wasn't consciously doing that at the time. When I look back on it, I think it was the only time in my life when I wasn't like moving all the time from place to place and to person, to thing, and because it was like a valid form of sitting still, going back to this idea of, you know, when is it okay to not be doing something, even if it's just in our mind. So yeah, I definitely think that was part of it, and then slowly but surely becoming more interested in the sound itself, and then like what I'd not noticed I'd been overlooking, and not seeing or hearing, or both.
We were talking about this the other day when we went. I went screen printing at the start of the year again. I've been getting back into it over the last year or so, and it really forces you to slow down. And it was kind of like I was getting anxious waiting for these things to dry, and it feels like it's all part of the same thing where everything is so immediate. And then Ryan in the office as well has started pottery, and he was kind of almost explaining the same thing.
Do you mean like ceramic potting?
Yeah.
Not like just pottering about.
Yeah, which would equally be the same kind of idea, wouldn't it? You know? Yeah.
Ceramic. Professional potter.
Yeah, I potter about. Most people would call it stalking, but you know, I've rebranded it. Yeah. Yeah. And you just end up being very much like beholden to the thing that you're making in terms of time. And it's really weird. Like I got really anxious, and then I just had to go into chapter, because I'm doing it at print house, and just have a coffee. And even then I'm doing something.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like I ended up going up and down the stairs about 20 times if I was in print house, because it's on 2 floors. It's like, just chill. I'm like, I just can't.
Yeah.
But so there was a friend of mine said to me years ago, and it's something I think about at least a few times a week, and it's that rest is an action. And I think that sometimes just remembering that like being still is also an action, and that and it takes practice. And so what everything that you're describing is like that is the, and it's hard because there's a few things. I think there's the fact that it's seen as lazy, but potentially it's not seen as productive or efficient or any of those things. And so there is a general sense of not doing something as opposed to it being doing something. And the idea, especially in the context of waiting for pots to dry or paint to dry or whatever, it's like it is the idea of waiting, but it's almost like having to flip that lens into something else, isn't it? The ability to be still.
It's really weird. Like, and I think it's, as someone who's always made stuff or seen himself as a reasonable level thinker in terms of creation and things, the moments of still and the moments of not thinking about the thing you're trying to solve are the kind of most important moments, because they're the moments that you come up with the solution or an idea or concept. So it's kind of weird. Like now, I feel like it's almost like we've had so many years of being battered by efficiency that it is kind of like being purged out of my system to be able to do that. Like at like 14 or all the way through to 20s, I did nothing. Like absolutely nothing. I just lay on the sofa all day.
Did you feel creative, or were you?
No, that's what I mean. Like, I feel like that I was just waiting and enjoying the waiting for this thing to kind of pop into my head. And now I'm just like, come on, I need something. It's really weird. I don't know. So I'm trying to do more of that. And I think that's why climbing has always been a constant, because it is one of those ones that disarms you to the level where you kind of have to be in that moment aware, but also kind of not quite aware. And getting out in the world, getting out in the landscape is a big part of that, I think. But I don't know, it's just very strange.
But I guess even then, like when you're not climbing, you are thinking about climbing. And sometimes that can like overtake then you being in the present when you're not climbing.
Would some people start talking about obsessive compulsive disorders and things like that? Not obsessive. What is it? Obsessive compulsion kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, but I guess, or obsessive thinking, maybe.
I don't know.
That you are consumed by. There's a balance, isn't it? You're consumed by the thing that you're passionate about. So when you're not doing it, you're thinking about it, but you're never actually resting from it.
Have you ever tried meditation, like actual sitting still meditation? Because obviously for some people climbing, would be a valid form of mindfulness meditation. I'm never really sure what's the difference between those two things. As a yoga instructor, Ali,
But unfortunately no one would know the answer to that on this call, would they?
I guess there's mindfulness is a practice within meditation. So that's a certain kind of meditation where you're being kind of quite, you're being aware of certain things. So one example could be you meditate on the sense of smell, or you meditate on the sense or sound, or you could do all senses. So you kind of rotate your awareness to each of these things. So you're being mindfully aware of them. And then I guess by having attention just on that one thing, that one sensation or one sense, everything else then sort of dissolves. So like your thoughts around, I don't know, what I'm going to have for tea tonight, or oh God, I've got to get that report in. Your whole awareness is just on what can I hear? But then it's also then not labeling what you hear. So it's not saying I can hear a bird. It's more like the texture of the sound. So you're trying to not get your thinking mind engaged to go, oh, that's a bird, I wonder what bird it is. It's like, that is a sound, you know, that it might be maybe high pitched in its quality and texture, or it's close rather than in the distance. So that's one variation of it. So yeah, it's a practice within meditation, but there's other meditations, you know, within the whole catalogue of things.
I feel like it's one of the practices that like will be part of my ongoing, like, as in when I lived in Cardiff, I used to go to the Buddhist centre in Roath.
Yeah.
And so this was so I was about 21, 22, and I would go weekly for Buddhist for meditation, and I did it for about a year. And by the end of that year, I'd moved up to like the second class where someone didn't talk. There was like, you know, there was sort of versions and someone would talk you through it. And then there was one where you just had a bell. And genuinely feel like I got to a place where I went somewhere different in my consciousness, which I think is what you're describing, where like everything is sort of textural as opposed to ego driven, like where I am and everything around me. It's more like a different place. I've never got to that place since, and I've gone back to meditation every now and again, and I've always got an app on the go. I've always got like Headspace or another one, you know, but I've never felt now it's like going back to what you were saying, Julie. I feel like I'm at like a, you know, if I manage 5 minutes a day, I feel like I've really achieved something. Whereas I used to sit there for an hour. I think it was once or twice a week I would go to the Buddhist centre. So we're talking, when would that have been? Like 2003? And it's just interesting because that would have been a time before apps on your phone. And, you know, it would be just, before smartphones. And it's interesting to think about, like, how many 21-year-old, I mean, I'm sure there are some that are going to Buddhist center, but, you know, like me now, I wouldn't be that 21-year-old, if you see what I mean, because of all the ways that I can find to distract myself time. So I would like to get back to a point. I think it's like a key. I think it's like a key to calm, to being able to wait for your print. To be able to sit in stillness,
because I think waiting is uncomfortable, and I don't think you'll ever get rid of sometimes having that feeling of being uncomfortable or even bored. And I think it's just how you react to that is the key of it, rather than eradicating those feelings. It's just not being too distracted or too consumed by them. You just you go, okay, I feel uncomfortable or I feel really bored, but that's kind of okay, rather than it going, oh god, I'm really bored, I hate this.
I have to walk up some stairs.
Yeah, I have to walk up some stairs. Up and down.
I'm sure that has to be quite a good thing to do, to walk up some stairs.
Yeah, I do think like the way I kind of perceive the world has been massively affected by social media and that behaviour. I think I realise when I now do sit down and read a book, I am scan reading it, which I didn't used to before. And my brain, I think, is sometimes scanning over words and interpreting them. And I go back and kind of go, oh, that wasn't the word that I thought it was, because I've just, you know, really quickly not just kind of like read it very quickly. And it's sort of like that word is something else, but my brain has made it or thought it's something else because I'm going so quickly. I've noticed that. And I think that's definitely because scrolling and scan reading or scan looking on your phone, particularly Instagram, I think your brain is just, I don't know, is making new pathways to perceive the world in that way, rather than, again, it's this slower paced thing. So kind of like trying to, I think, retrain my brain to be able to read again.
But you know, there's a lot of great thinkers who argue that that's the way to read, because you can read more, you can get more information. So you know, Rory Stewart, the podcaster / Tory / human I can't believe I'm so interested in, but I am. And but that's how he reads. He talked about that on their you know, The Rest Is Politics podcast, about the fact that he gets through so many books because he scan reads. and maybe it's like there are different words for reading,
Yeah.
perhaps, like like in the way that there is for listening. You've got like different versions, different sort of criteria. So it's almost like, right, I want to read this with intention, almost like in a mindful way. But I want to read this to get as much information as I can as quickly as possible. Like, and they are perhaps two different things. I think they are, probably, in the same way as we can listen to the radio in the background and we can, listen intently to an audiobook or to somebody sitting in front of us. And they are actually different types of listening as well. Like, I love the sound of air, like conditioners outside buildings, and like I will often stop outside a building and like take my phone out and do some recording of that, or just stand there and listen to it. And it's just like the drone of it is so lovely. And I just, up until that point, I'd not heard that sound. I'd obviously had, but not in any way consciously. And so it sort of changed my relationship to the texture, to use your word, Ali, like the texture of everything around me all the time. So yeah, it's been probably my one, I would say, the most important creative choice in a way that I've made since, because I think it offers me something really, really nourishing, and as well as opening up narratives which I think were completely missing to me because I'd been so focused on people for so long.
So you'd introduced us, and talking of sound, is that an aeroplane?
Yeah, well, it's a helicopter.
Oh,
what day is it today? Fridays. They often do have training, and they go up and down this valley, the helicopters.
Do you record them? Have you recorded them?
In fact, I hate them. The amount of times they've ruined things I've recorded. I mean, there's an amazing field recordist. I'm sure you know of him, Chris Watson, but he hates sheep for the same reason. He believes that sheep are like they're like the scourge of his life, that he'll be recording like the sound of a skylark, or he'll have managed to find the golden eagle in Scotland or something, and then they'll be like, bah! Oh, for God's sake, because he just thinks that they're not a natural part of our landscape in the way that, it's part of an unnatural part of our landscape is that sheep exist everywhere. So yeah, it's like, but I living on a farm as I do, I am very familiar with the sound of sheep being in the background of everything. So yeah, I've learned to love them and not hate them. But the helicopter thing is, I don't know why. There's something about it which, whenever they come down the valley, I just always imagine some macho people, and I think I'm just being very judgy, but I'm just imagining some people going, "Should we pop in the helicopter?" But it could be mountain rescue. I'm sure it could be very valid, but it doesn't seem like it. They're in black helicopters. Yeah, they're very annoying. Drones, I feel the same about drones. I will often be somewhere like in Aruri. I don't know if you've ever found this when you're climbing around there, but like there are a lot of people now who have drones, and I get it. Like, drones make pretty pictures, but they're noisy. They're a real invasion in sound, of our landscape, in a way that I think the same people who are doing the drone would be really livid if it was something else, but because it's that, but anyway, yeah, I don't like them either.
It's kind of interesting. You kind of, in one way, accepting and kind of almost like happy for things like air conditioning units and stuff like that, granted in an urban environment, so it is slightly different, but this kind of interesting contrast between these things that I guess we as people have just literally zoned out to, and then we've got these things like drones, which are such a peculiar sound and frequency, like you say, compared to an aeroplane or fighter jet or a helicopter. They're very different. They're almost, I think they almost tie into our wariness of insects like wasps and things, because they're almost to that level of frequency, aren't they? And I think first time you hear one of those, you're kind of like, it's more that warning sign kind of sound almost. It's interesting how, like you say, they come into a landscape that for many people have literally gone to get away from the drum of urban.
Literally the drone of the city.
In terms of when you started kind of making recordings and kind of collecting stories, if you like, I imagine it was a lot harder back then, initially, in terms of the equipment, the ease now of just pulling out your phone, like you say, and kind of pressing record or taking a photo or taking a video. It's so different. So has that in any way changed your experience of collecting stories, in the sense that, you mentioned earlier about starting it and then almost having to need the word or the action of recording to justify listening to the sound, that then you then were like, more than it sounded like the record became less relevant because you were kind of just almost in the sound and you were just listening, you were kind of listening for its sake. But has the ease changed that experience for you at all, or
you mean the ease of technology?
Yeah, I guess like the ease of being able to set things up, other than it being easier, like, or did you get into a state where part of it was this kind of collection of equipment, doing it in a certain way, I guess ritual or routine, or is it kind of made it easier and better?
Yeah, I mean,
different?
I guess it's things that have shifted over the years is more my interest in how do I get to sounds that I wouldn't otherwise hear. So I'm more likely now, and over the last few years, to be using contact mics or hydrophones to record the sounds that I actually can't get to by just listening with my ear, I mean. So it's almost like there is a process in, like, it's like the archaeology kind of thing of like digging into things. I'm looking around now, so from my window I can see the farm, which is called Tŷ Newydd, which is ironic, guys, because it's not a new house, it's a very old house. And and the fences, and like I have recorded more or less every fence, the metal of every fence on this farm. And it's an ongoing process. So the farm is rented out. My dad is in his 80s now. We don't know what we're going to do with it, long term. None of us as a family want to farm. And over the last few years, even before I moved back, I started recording the sounds of the space. And I think the fences in particular were interesting to me, because once I was introduced to what a fence sounds like, which is, for anyone who's never heard the process, it's like a metal fence with a contact mic attached to it can sound, I don't know, it can sound beautiful, it can sound harrowing, it can sound like a horror film, it can sound like a violin. Like, there are so many elements which can come from putting, and you don't know until you put that microphone onto the fence and put the headphones on, because it can be affected by air pressure, if there's wind and there's grass on it, which you might not even be able to see. It might be from something like half a mile away, if the fence is that long. It's about the tautness of the fence. So there is this like absolute, I guess it's like discovery every single time. So there's a layer of it which is about like, I wonder what sound it is today, and it could be something it could be nothing. There could be just like, it could be awful. And then there are days when it could be amazing. There's the fact that I know that my dad put these fences up, and you know, over the last potentially 80 years of his life, there's been sharing that with my dad, which obviously he finds absolutely hilarious. He's like, why are you doing this? And I'm like, come on, like, listen to the sounds. These are your sounds. You built this. And he's like, can we go and watch Bargain Hunt and like have a nice time? But it's, you know, there is something for me. It's almost like creating, the way that I've thought about it for me is creating an heirloom, a sound heirloom of this landscape, which also includes field recordings, birds. You know, every year I record like the dawn chorus. There's like certain rituals that I have of each year in the space, but there's an amazing recordings when lockdown was happening, and there were, because the A5 goes right through the village, like right through the heart of it, so the majority of the time there's always car noise in the background, and then in 2020 that was gone for a while, so that was quite an extraordinary difference in the sound of things. So the focus on this space has been quite a big thing for me, and again, it's not a public thing. This is not part of my it's not part of a job or work. I've never asked for funding for it, but it's like an ongoing project, which I find quite funny, because it's like I have no idea if anyone will ever want to listen to it, but the process of doing it is so meaningful for me. The process of and it reminds me to go out and do it. Like, the fact that you can get your phone out and record things, I think maybe that's why I've got more and more interested in things which you have to do a little bit more work in order to get something, because it's a bit like the amount of people, there are lots of young people who apparently they are really interested in analog photography again, because like, actually it goes back to this idea of intention and focus, and what do we get when we actually give the gift of focus to something, to ourselves, like, you know, or to others. And so I think that's why it's so important to me to do that. So, and the hydrophones are, you know, they're underwater microphones, but I use them a lot in mud, but a lot in puddles and water and ice and things like that, to try and see what comes from it. I tend not to interfere with the landscape. So I've been, you know, I've tried different things. Like, there are people who play fences, or you know, interact with it in different ways. In order, they might even put a speaker. And I have tried this, like, I got my dad's voice recorded, and then I was like playing my dad's voice through the fence, so that I then was picking up through the contact mic his voice through the fence. And so there's like, and it is interesting, but it's not, at the moment anyway, it's not what I'm doing. I'm sort of just gathering and keeping, and trying to in some way record the space, because I know there's going to be a point at which this is gone in some way or another. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I mean, when it comes to my actual like paid work, sound has become I have made it part of what I do, if you see what I mean. And sometimes it's to a point where like it's not even mentioned to other people, but like when I did a series of podcasts for National Theatre Wales when they were doing stuff about climate in Eryri, and I was recording the sessions they were having between artists and community, and I spent quite a number of hours recording in the landscape around there, and that is all part of the soundscape within the within the podcast, but not in a way which in any way is said or explained, or you know, again, it's textural and it's meaningful for me, and I think it adds something, but not in a way which I think needs to be like, it's not on the credits. That weird bloopy sound at the end came from a hydrophone dipped into the lake. You know, it makes everything more interesting to me. If I'm not just going on to freesounds.org, which I do, don't get me wrong. But like, if it's not just bloopy sounds, please, from freesound.org.
Because when you told us about the hydrophone, we actually bought one, didn't we? And we took it on holiday where we went to France.
Yeah.
Went to Fontainebleau last September with some friends, and on a walk. I mean, I think initially they were like, what is happening? Because Julian came out with the hydrophone and then some headphones, and we were walking around and he was just sort of plopping these into puddles. And I think initially they were like, right, but actually then we got everybody to listen, didn't we?
Yeah.
And it is actually kind of quite incredible, these sudden hidden worlds that you can suddenly magically portal into with this kit. You know, it is kind of quite magic. And then you sort of then begin to realize, yeah, then everyone has this sort of vibration, you know, or and sound that is, it can be invisible. So there is something almost like you're unlocking this amazing hidden space that you would on an average day kind of just not even think about. So it definitely, on that walk, kind of then transforms how then we began to look at the space around us, kind of much more mindfully and then in much more detail. It's actually kind of quite fascinating, isn't it? So I can kind of see how the recording of the home that you live in now is kind of so important. It becomes like a sort of a diary, doesn't it? Or a journal, or kind of like a memoir almost. Definitely. Of that space.
Yeah, I've recorded sounds of, for 10 years I've been going away with a group of friends, and I have sound recordings of each of those holidays. They're not contact mics, they're just like us having dinner and stuff. Creepy. But it's really amazing. Again, it's these acts of recording, we often, and it's the same with all the oral history work and all of that, it's almost like, I don't know, I think it's such a hopeful act, because there is this sense of believing that this will have relevance at some point, and it's like planting a tree or something, and it's like, in the moment you don't know what it's going to look like or if it's going to work, but you do it anyway. But yeah, those friends have got kids, and so like listening to those sounds, like going back to some of them from like 6 or 7 years ago, there's lots of different ways that I think it holds meaning. Like that, as you say, there's like a journal element, there's an in the moment element, there's capturing these different layers. There's definitely, the word portal really resonated with me, because I see a lot of my work, my practice, as supporting other people to step through a portal. That's like a massive part. And I didn't have the words for that until I went to see Marina Abramovich do on one of her, she had an exhibition called Gates and Portals, and that exhibition was like, it was so meaningful for me to go like, oh, that's what I do, like, as in I'm like a Marina Abramovich, no, but like, it's somehow giving people the opportunity and holding their hand in some way or another into a safe space of some kind, whether that's through offering them the space to tell their story in an oral history context, or stepping into a story shop, or listening to a fence with me. Like, it is somehow saying, come and have a come and experience something that you might not have thought about or considered doing, or come and tell me a story that you might not think is interesting to anyone else, in the same way as I keep going back to fences, but I am looking at a fence that I particularly record right now out this window, and and it is like it's like you want to offer it. I do genuinely believe it's like a gift, as in a present, not like a special skill. I mean, like that if you can create a space for someone to get out of their everyday world into either like looking like reflection, which I think is a genuinely important thing, to have a space to see something or hear something differently, or to let them shift their lens on a place or an experience, then like that's what the portal is for me. And so you often have to have something symbolic. So putting on headphones is one. It's why in exhibitions I often like headphones, because I actually think I think there's a portal element to it. There is an element of like, oh, I'm allowed to like ignore everything else when I put these on. It's why when I'm doing interviews with people, I like to like put the clock off in the room, and I'll, often it's because of the ticking, but there is also an element of like, we're gonna step into another zone now, and So I think portals are really important.
Yeah, it's quite a similar technique, isn't it? With Punch Drunk, you put on a mask, and that's kind of, again, it's kind of a significant of this, you are entering a different space, and also you're entering a different mindset. I guess it also, for them, it's that sense of anonymity as an audience member, a sense of invisibility, so that you can explore that space in a non-traditional way, and there's no expectation of how and where you move. It's entirely up to you, because you are invisible in that sense. So that kind of, it's interesting that you have that same approach with the headphones. I hadn't really actually thought of it in that way, of that signifier to an audience. I put the headphones on, that gives me permission to actually just immerse myself in whatever I hear, and then be guided by that, and how maybe, as you said, it changes or shifted your focus in that space in terms of what you maybe are directed to see or not to see in many ways. That's really, really interesting.
And when I do story shops, so story shops are generally have always been spaces taken over, traditionally a empty shop that has been taken over in some way to explore a subject. So normally I've been commissioned in these instances to create a space in order to explore something. So for example, in Flint in North Wales, it was to explore what people felt about public art, and also their own, and so that was like one thread, and the other thread was like what was important to people of Flint, that could then be put into potentially public art. And this was in response to the fact that they had announced they were going to make a public artwork, which was a metal ring, which got absolutely slammed because it reflected the ring of castles colonizing Wales, and there'd been no consultation, or at least very minimal consultation about what people would want. And so they sort of completely backtracked, and they were like, oh, maybe we could do some listening to people from this town before we decide, and let's have a think about whether public art is even relevant in this space. But that particular story shop, so the model in a way for me is always when people walk through the door and come into this space, like, how are they greeted? Literally by somebody, by like how is their experience walking in facilitated, but very much they're like walking through the threshold. How can what they see be really curious and interesting, but also really homely, so that you're not asking people, like, it's not really of interest to me in my work to make people feel uncomfortable. I can really see the relevance of it for other people's artwork. I really like it for myself to choose to go and see work like that. But that's not the way, like, I don't have the balls because I think my feeling very much is I want people to feel safe, and for me that's what I want in order to whatever comes next, whether it's like to ask them a question, whether it's to listen to what they have to say, whether it's to have a difficult conversation. I believe, and the way that I want to work is to create a space for people to feel safe but intrigued, as opposed to like on edge and not knowing what's going to happen next kind of thing. And you can't force safety onto people. One person's safety is not necessarily someone else's. But the story shop is, when you walk into the door, like, I want there to be a sofa somewhere. I want there to be an immediate sense of like, oh, it's a place I'm allowed to sit down. It's I always want the sight line when you walk in to have the image of the sofa somewhere that you can sit. I want there to be a space where you can see something you recognize, so something about the place that we're in, the town or the village, or you know, whatever it might be. So there might be some big image, some photograph. I will often have old photos of that place on a loop, so there's this kind of familiarity of like, oh, I remember the post office, I remember and it's like, from those safe starting points of this, like, then you can start having all sorts of conversations. You can talk about, in Treherbert we did one and it was all about climate shifting and change and energy, and obviously that's quite that can be a very difficult conversation to have. But because of those elements, there was like a little living room, there was a little a kitchen sort of where in your eye line when you walked in. It just immediately evoked, and people kept coming back. And that's the thing that happens with it, is that they keep coming back. And what's extraordinary, and I find it really fascinating, and we've never done any like research on it, but I'd love to do that, is to like, why people come back and they bring something. So it's, even if we haven't asked for anything, although I do tend to try now and have like a blank wall that gets filled over the period of time that we're in a space, which is normally about 1 to 2 weeks. But people will come back and they will have like a photo and they'll be like, we thought you might want this, or you know, oh, this reminded me of, you know, my grandmother, and here is a cake that she used to make. And honestly, we've had so many things, and yeah, and I feel like it's a reciprocal thing. It's like people feel like they can return if they then offer something. I don't know, there is something that goes on, and I'd love to understand a bit more about what happens, but it's really powerful, and the stories that get shared are extraordinary, you know. But I do think it's that portal element.
And I wonder if there's just never an opportunity for that space in your daily life to share those stories, because maybe sometimes there just isn't time, or there isn't that opportunity, or there isn't the people there to listen, or want to listen. So actually, as soon as you do offer that invitation, suddenly all of those things that people have in terms of forgotten memory, or memory that they haven't been able to share for a really long time, that space allows them to offer that, because somebody is there willing to listen and hold that space for them. And I think maybe in terms of our sense of community now, where perhaps that space used to be prominent, we're lacking. So I think as soon as there is that space for people to do that, I think people are absolutely willing to share. I think that's kind of part of it. I think you offer that invitation, and maybe we just don't do that day to day because we are in our routine. Maybe there's a lack of connectivity between our community in terms of our neighbours, you know, in some places. So I think, it's that rarity, isn't it, of having that space to do and share those stories.
And I mean, I'll often make a joke of it when I meet people. I'll say, you know, or about my work, I'll be like, I'm just like a professional nosy person, because there's this weird, and I don't know why I do that. It's interesting. I think it's because we're taught that asking questions is nosy or something. I don't know. And that it's not something that you should do. It's rude. Like, you can ask how someone is, but not really ask them how they are. Like, I don't know. It's strange, because my experience is that most people do want to be heard and talk, obviously with the right time and place. But I feel like to be given the permission to do it, because you're going to sit down with somebody, to be given the permission to ask the questions, so because you're doing an oral history project about something, is such a gift for me. Like, it's such a nice thing that I feel like, oh, I'm so lucky that I can just do this thing that I want to do anyway, but I can but I'm allowed to, and they also know that I'm coming to do that, because we're pretty much told all the time not to waste people's time, not to bother them. And I don't know how much it is bothering people, or how much we're actually closing opportunities down all the time.
It's like, my dad would talk to anyone. Like, my dad would absolutely talk to anyone. And sometimes, when I was younger, I'd be like, oh my gosh, so cringy. But, actually that kind of, I don't know what it was, confidence, or that's just his manner. It did actually really break down barriers within situations with strangers. Like, on the bus, or at bus stop, or in a queue. He would just chat to whoever. And it's actually where I wish I was kind of more like that in many ways, because just having that connection, I think is again really magic. I mean, that was his, I think, superpower, to be able to do that. So I would love to have even like an ounce of that. And I think you're very good at that. I think that's, again, the same kind of superpower that you have. Very good at just being so open with people that you don't know. And I think, asking, questions that get people to talk, and make people feel safe. I think that is an incredible gift that you have.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it really is.
It's
And
something
I think there's a lack of that. I think, again, it's back to that thing of like constraint, or restraint, maybe is a better word, of what we're taught, how we're taught to behave within certain situations, particularly public spaces, and with strangers, in the UK, maybe. I don't know.
I almost can't, I can't help it. Like, it's it is real. It's almost like a problem in a way. But I think, and I've thought about this, like, why has this always appealed to me? Why have I didn't know that you could do a job which was recording people's stories. Like, I didn't know that was a thing. So I did journalism as my degree, because I guess that was the only option that was sort of that I could understand, was a way of doing this thing. But if I actually look back, and I think it's about, my mum was a physiotherapist in Codwen, the local town to here, and her way of doing physiotherapy was, I don't think it was just her way, but it was the way that it happened at the time. It was a room where lots of people would come in. And so she would, there would be Jeff over there doing something with something. There would be Jill over there who would be doing something with, she had solitaire with marbles, and that was a big thing for certain type of dexterity. There'd be someone behind a screen that she was doing massage on and stuff. And so my mum got pregnant with me. Let's get personal. My mum got pregnant with me when, unexpectedly, she thought she was going through the menopause, and surprise, so she was only 38, but at the time that was considered incredibly old, and she had just taken this job on. I think she'd only been doing it for about 6 months, and so she wasn't actually, she asked, is it okay if I bring the baby in? So from when I was born, I was in this space surrounded by these people who my mum was treating, but who her approach to it was, I'm giving them exercises they need to do for their, for this, whatever is happening for them physically. But I'm also giving them the opportunity to talk to each other, to talk to me. And I guess without her really having the words for it, she was using a very holistic approach to it. Like now, if you see a physio, it's, you go into a room, they have their half an hour with you or whatever, they do their treatment and you leave. But she was approaching it from this perspective of like that part of the treatment was social and was an opportunity to be in this safe, warm space. People were given cups of tea. I mean, honestly, it was the best place to grow up. She tried to put me into a nursery when I was like 2, and I was like, absolutely not. Who are these children? I hate them. Take me back to the old people who are coughing and spluttering with their bad knees. And I refused to go to the nursery. And so until I went to school, I spent my days in this place. And I think that had this huge effect on my interest in people, in my comfort with other people's discomfort. I don't mean that in like a weird way, but like I'm used to being with people who are ill, being with people who are in pain, being with people who are sharing some of the hardest things, some of the funniest things. And it's always about the sort of, there's so much humor in all of that. There's that's the thing about people's stories, even the darkest, most difficult times, there's always some humor, there's always some element of joy that can be just part of it, and I think that I experienced that in this osmosis type way as a child without even realizing it. And then I was always looking for it, I imagine I was always looking for that, like, let's go deeper. The idea of just being surface level seems crazy to me. Like, and I have to honestly, if I'm on a bus like your dad, Ali, or whatever, I have to actually say to myself, like, do not ask this person that question. I was at a dinner recently for a friend's birthday and I hadn't met anyone apart from the person whose birthday it was. And I was sat next to this and this person who I'd never met before. And within 3 questions, the third question I asked her was, and what was your relationship with your mum? And like, I caught myself and I was like, I am so sorry, because she basically said that she just had a baby and that, it's challenging. And I was like, I'm so sorry. Like, we should be talking about what you do for a job or something. Or like, have you watched Severance? Like, we shouldn't be on, but it's almost like, and it is, but it feels so natural to ask the question that feels like it's hanging in the air in some way or another. But I also, I don't want to make people uncomfortable at dinner. So, but yeah, it is who I am. But I do think that fundamentally it's like, and even the story shop stuff, I think about the atmosphere that my mum created. And I've done a little bit of research into like geography, like the approach of like ambience, like creating ambience, and that's a really important thing for me. How do you create a space which feels safe? How do you create space or not safe, but how do you build that with what you see, with what you hear, with what you smell, and I'm sure that you guys in the work that you do and the theatre making and the and yoga and all of that, it's all about like, so much of it is about atmosphere, isn't it? And like what you're creating for people to be in, and it's actually something that's sometimes quite hard to articulate, but yeah, I really think that my mum Mary is responsible for how nosy I am.
And do you, obviously you said you did journalism in university. And do you see yourself as a documentary maker, or like,
Yeah.
I guess, where is that line? I guess because it's almost like three things into one, isn't it? Because you have to, and maybe a lot of people who make documentaries are also journalists by trade, but there obviously is a question or something you're looking to understand or get an answer for, in a way. And then I guess is your mechanism for that, or your mechanic for that, is the shop, or in one context is the shop that allows that kind of it feels like it's your way of getting the answers in the answers you want, but also in the way that you want as well, in terms of you didn't want them to go back to the lady after 3 questions. You didn't want to like properly break them, you wanted to kind of them to convivially and in a nice way volunteer that information, rather than you through torture, you kind of get the answer, kind of thing. yeah. Is that exactly? Is that kind of like, is that how you see it, in a sense?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think defining like the definition, I struggle with it so much. I don't know how you guys feel. Like do you call yourself an artist? Do you call yourself? I've often, most of my life, called myself a digital storyteller, because that's that was the first model that I used for facilitating people to share stories. I've never called myself a journalist. Like, I've never written for a newspaper or I've never felt like my job is to like inform the public using some quotes or something. Like, I don't know, it's sort of interesting. I know that journalists are often looking for stories. Loads of journalists I really respect, but I never felt that, it never sat right with me. I was fascinated by the degree, but it was the module on digital storytelling, which was the one that I went, oh my God, like, that's the thing. I didn't know that there was a thing, and there's a way of like helping someone share the story that they want to share. And digital storytelling was all about at that time helping someone write a script, but before YouTube existed, how to create like a short 2-minute film about something that mattered in their lives, and it wasn't for us to say what that thing was. So if someone wanted to talk about waterfalls, I just remember that quite clearly, because there was one about waterfalls where a lot of us, as the team of people working on this, because then I did go on to join a team at the BBC doing digital storytelling after university, there was a bit of eye rolling about, oh, someone loves waterfalls, yeah, sure. But actually it was like, that was a really important thing for that person. And whereas journalists, they decide on the story, like a documentary maker also decides on the story, I guess. And what appealed to me about digital storytelling was like, you are giving people the space to tell you what their story is. Obviously that over the years, because it's been over 20 years now, like, has shifted, and depending on the project, or if I'm being commissioned or whatever, like there are times when the story is laid out. We're doing stories about chemotherapy, we're doing stories about whatever, but the angle on that story, like, I guess the ethics for me are important. Like, how can I make sure that person is telling me the story they want to tell? I just was imagining being back with that woman, asking her about her mother. It's like, I'm not sure if I gave her the opportunity to tell me the story she wanted to tell. But
that's the one time you turned into a proper journalist. Solve the other 5 questions. I'm going to go through the last one.
That's the thing. Like, sometimes I do try and catch myself, like, is like, are you just going for the
the sensational story?
Yeah. But it's there's so much in it. So when you're trying to help someone tell their story, whether it's about waterfalls or a death in their life or their experience of cancer or whatever it is, it's like somehow supporting them to find the essence of that story. And like that's, and so I've always thought of myself, this is how I actually think of myself. I think of myself as a facilitator. That's how I see myself. It's just not a very sort of catchy word, but it's like I see myself as someone you know, who is supporting, whether that is the sounds of offence, or it's someone telling their story of chemotherapy, or whatever it might be. It's like, how can I create the best atmosphere to help someone tell and find themselves the essence of that? And that includes, how can I ask the right questions to help them find that essence? And I mean, and I'm not saying it's a perfect form, and that's why I think I've tried lots of different types of things. I think like walking, recording people while walking. I feel like now I've got a palette of ways, and then depending on the project or the person, or like I feel like I've got, like, over the years I've developed a shorthand. So digital storytelling as a model was really useful at the beginning, because it taught me how to support people to write a script in a very, you know, it was very, very structured, and it came from America, and there was this like, but that really has moved for me, because I think people are so individual. And if you really truly believe that everyone has a story to tell, which was our motto at the BBC, if you really believe that everyone, like, it is individual, then you can't just have one mode of helping them share a story. And you also, for a lot of people, going deep or reflecting is not going to be right for them. For someone else, it will be actually much more like about the feelings in the moment of having chemotherapy. For someone else, it might be about what that means for them looking back, you know. And I think being a facilitator is partly about being able to find the right way, the right portal into the story. And yeah, and so defining like a thing I find so difficult. So socially engaged artist is something I've said quite a bit, because I do think there's something, but that doesn't feel right. Everything feels wanky. That's the hard thing, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Like, it all feels a bit like, because I think part of, if you'd like to do this sort of work, generally you kind of want to be invisible. And so, but the nature of like sharing what you know, or letting other people know, or introducing yourself to somebody, you have to have words to do it. But it makes me feel itchy, if I'm honest. Like, I feel like I just, you know, can I be invisible, ideally? Yeah. Which is always a tension. It's a tension that's existed in this, and it's a tension that's existed in, I think, storytellers and documentary makers and facilitators and whatever you want to call your, you know, people, artists, over so long, is that tension between how visible are you, what impact, what did you make happen, and what did they want to happen? And I just don't think there is a real easy answer to that.
Yeah, because I guess in relation to, let's say, a project where you're collecting oral histories, is there an element then of curation for you, I suppose, then as almost a producer in delivering that project to whoever's commissioned you, how then you curate, and I suppose this might not be the right word, but edit those stories into a deliverable project then for that commission? How do you do that without yeah, how does that sit? Because I guess if you've been interviewing somebody, let's say for over an hour, but you have to produce a 10-minute version of that, how do you then go about doing that, but still, you know, still remaining true to the words and the feeling and the emotion from that interview of what people wanted to say? How do you, or do you condense it down? Maybe you don't. Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear a little bit more about that. Yeah.
I do.
And how do you do that? What's your process and approach to that?
Yeah, I have over the years thought a lot about this, because I think it's, if you're doing this sort of work, you have to think about the ethics of what you're doing. And I don't again, I don't think I've got like a perfect answer in any way, but I do. So if I've recorded somebody and I'm gonna, I will obviously explain to someone the process of this is going to be that if I'm recording someone asking questions, I'm going to edit this down. There are a couple of things that I like to do. If it's an oral history, I see it as there's a whole recording. That's the oral history. I am going to adapt this oral history into a short story, and I'm going to edit that down. And I will explain what that will involve, and then I will ask the person who I'm editing. I will always go back to the person and say, are you happy with this edit? So that's my personal checks and balances. I'm not saying there isn't that still can be uncomfortable, because I can say, oh, they didn't want any changes, that means they were happy. I don't actually know that. You don't know if someone's thinking they don't want to be a pain, or but I fundamentally, I guess, I've come to a position, and I feel slightly reluctant saying this, but I do feel like I can hear the moment that someone is saying something that's true to them, and I feel like I've had the experience enough, and I mean literally I've recorded thousands of people's stories, thousands of them. I believe I've had the experience many times of sharing an edit back with someone and hearing them say, I didn't even know that's what I wanted to say, but that is absolutely what I wanted to say. And I'm not saying that's every single time, but there's enough of that that's given me the confidence to believe that I have an ability that has been honed over a long period of time to be able to listen to what is the moment. And I think it comes back to my mum and the physio, because I think that she would always do that with I think I know what the problem is with this knee. And it will often be about something that they do in their lives, a walk that they take, or a way that they drive, or something. And I think that there's something about that when I'm listening to someone, it's something that's I can feel it. I can feel when someone has reached the thing that they wanted to say. And when I'm editing, it's almost like, even though I'm looking at a waveform on an edit, it almost like it goes red or something. There's this sort of point as I'm listening back to it. There's this point at which I'm like, oh, that's the thing. And it's not me thinking oh, that's the drama. Because often it's not that. It'll be someone talking to me about growing tomatoes, and it'll be the moment that they talk about when they pop the first tomato in their mouth and it explodes in their mouth, and you're the excitement in their voice, or there can be so many different things that are happening, but it feels like it's what they wanted to say, not what I think is the best version of that story. So it can be challenging, because sometimes you can hear something that you think, oh, that's great, they cried then, and that's a really lovely emotional bit, but it's not important to what they were trying to say, or it doesn't feel like it reflects who they were in the room with me, and so I'm not going to put that in. And I have to have some trust in myself, I think, that I'm coming from a good place when I'm editing. And if I'm not comfortable with sharing something back with someone after I've edited, then I know that I'm not doing it for the right reasons. There is some other reason I'm doing that, and maybe that was more interesting or more powerful, but it wasn't what was right for the person. So I can feel the discomfort if I'm not coming from the place that I want to come from. So I guess I've got my own little checks and balance by making sure I go back to the person.
Is there a period of time from when you're interviewing someone to when you have to do the edit? So like, for example, when I'm doing workshops and things like that, and I've kind of generally, as you said earlier, like you're the facilitator, so you're asking the questions, you're also kind of trying to make a mental record of everything that's been said, and you're also then making a few post-it notes, but fundamentally you're trying to run the thing as well. And I feel like I almost have to get everyone out of the room and start writing my notes, because they will go very quickly. And maybe it's different because you've got the audio record, but there's still an element, even if I'm 2-3 days afterwards, it's almost like I've never been in that workshop. I'm like, oh, they said that. And I feel sometimes the feel that you had in that workshop is different a few days later, and that can be good and bad. That's not to say that you were perfect. You might have been swayed early. You might have time to reflect. But is there a gestation period, or a thing that you leave it a certain amount of time, if possible, to think about that the interview you've done?
Yeah, there's a practice in oral history. It's really, really encouraged. The first thing that you do after an interview is write your notes, and and download your recording. Haven't always been true to this method, but writing the notes is extraordinary. If you do it straight away afterwards, the difference to if you do it, as you say, like 24, 48, a week later, it's because when I'm doing training in oral history, I really encourage this act of, like, in your timing, allow half an hour at the end to just immediately bash out what stood out to you, because it is incredible how those things disappear. So yeah, I completely agree. And I think, to be honest, I don't think that having a gap is ever that useful. So gestation, I'm trying to think if there was ever a time, but I am someone who loves a deadline. So there is there is an unfortunate reality of the fact that almost every time I'm coming to edit someone's, I'm like, why didn't I do this straight away? Because it would be so much easier if I had, but if I've got my notes, it's helpful, obviously, but even if I've done those notes, it's like they were written by someone else, because there's been this period of time. And then I look at them and I'm like, but it's so, the recording is so crucial, because I can get back into the place where I was through listening. But I do find it annoying about myself that I need that deadline of when I'm delivering something. And this thing of recording the farm, I don't have a deadline, right? Obviously. And so I've got all this material. Will it ever become anything? Like, does it matter? I don't know. But it's like, if someone gave me a deadline, I would actually give myself the permission to maybe have a bit of a think and to come back to it and to do some reflection with it. So yes, in answer to your question, I think it's really, really good to do it straight away. In reality, I don't. If I did, I would be a much better person. But I also wouldn't be myself.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Crafted Reality. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And of course, if you want to support the podcast and access exclusive content, head over to our Patreon. We'll be back next time.